Pain relief following a caesarean birth tends to be fairly standard across the NHS, but there can be some slight variations depending on whether you have a spinal or a general anaesthetic. Some units will prescribe slightly different variations of different drugs though. So let's take the spinal or epidural anaesthesia as the first instance. In these cases, you will have the pain relief from the spinal or the epidural until that wears off in the postnatal period. On average, this is around about 4 to 6 hours in the postnatal period. You will also be offered something called diclofenac in a lot of hospitals. This is a suppository, a tablet that goes up the bottom at the end of the caesarean. You don't feel it, but you should be asked for your consent before administering it. For women who have had a postpartum hemorrhage, who have had preeclampsia, or women who are asthmatic or allergic to ibuprofen or non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, you will not be offered this pain relief. And then in the postnatal period, you will have regular paracetamol and ibuprofen, again assuming there's no allergies to either of those. On top of that, whilst you're an inpatient in the hospital, you may be offered oral morphine. So this is morphine that's orally administered to yourself. Whilst you're an inpatient in the hospital, you may also be offered oral morphine. So this is an oral liquid morphine solution that you drink. This is on a PRN basis, and PRN stands for per required need. And so you have to ask for this in order to be able to have that oral morphine. You also can't go home with the oral morphine solution either. However, as another option, you could go home with dihydrocodeine, and that's something that some hospitals will do as a completely regular medication alongside the paracetamol and ibuprofen, or instead of the ibuprofen for women who are unable to have ibuprofen. The downsides to the opiates, so that's the oral morphine and the dihydrocodeine, is that it can slow down the bowel motility, which can lead to constipation in women, which can cause more pain and discomfort a few days later. So if you are having an opioid prescription medication, so things like the oral morphine, things like the dihydrocodeine, ask for a prescription and to start taking some lactulose ahead of time as well. This will soften the stools and mean that you can hopefully avoid the constipation side of things. Ask if lactulose is a possibility to have just whilst you're on that medication. As soon as you've stopped any opioid medication, whether that's in the hospital or as a takeaway medication, as soon as that opioid medication is stopped, then it's worth stopping the lactulose at the same time. Lots of units will also offer something like peppermint water or peppermint tea to be able to help with the discomfort of the wind pain that happens on day 1 after a caesarean birth. You can, however, take your own in. Most units will not send you home with paracetamol or ibuprofen and will expect you to be able to buy that yourself given how cheap it is over the counter, but things like dihydrocodeine, lactulose, all of those sorts of medications will be prescribed to you before you go home to take home with you. Now, in contrast, if you have a general anaesthetic caesarean birth, you haven't got the same amount of pain relief following a spinal or an epidural anaesthetic, because as you come round, you are then having the discomfort of the caesarean birth straight away. Now, every unit is different, and it's worth asking your midwife what happens in your local unit to find out what they will prescribe you and offer you. In some units, what they will do is they will inject local anaesthetic around the scar itself to provide that additional level of anaesthesia as you are waking up from that general anaesthetic. In most units, however, they will do an intravenous drip of the morphine where you will control it. So it's patient-controlled analgesia in a lot of trusts. And any time that you have pain or discomfort as you are in that recovery period, you can keep pressing that button. Now, the downsides of intravenous morphine is that you tend to be more heavily sedated, a lot more sleepy and drowsy. And so that can impact on those early hours of bonding and attachment with baby potentially. And that's why those early hours of recovering following a general anaesthetic caesarean birth can be slightly more challenging than women who had a spinal or an epidural anaesthetic. And if you are in a unit that gives us diclofenac suppository, this will also be offered at the end of the general anaesthetic caesarean birth as well, assuming that you could have this. Now, once you reach the postnatal wards, the pain relief, whether you've had a general anaesthetic spinal or an epidural, remain the same for the postnatal period. Most units will offer you paracetamol, then they will offer you an anti-inflammatory medication and or an opioid medication, either whilst you're in the hospital and or to take home with you.